5 drawings in 5 days, that's my goal. Well, my true goal is actually to push myself to create on a bigger scale in a shorter amount of time, and also to pay for rent. So this is day 1, drawing 1. Let's get to it. What I have to figure out is how I'm going to create a quality drawing in a short amount of time. So how I get around that problem is by using shortcuts. Through trial and error and through years of drawing, I've figured out multiple shortcuts with basically everything that I draw. And for today, the shortcut I will be using is disguising a simple pattern drawing as a complex looking drawing by repeating a few high detailed designs. That gives the illusion that the drawing is really complex when it is really just a bunch of repeated patterns that look random enough to give the impression that it's more complex than it actually is. I sometimes wonder if my entire art career has been giving off the illusion that my work is more complex than it actually is. I mean, I don't think so, but there's definitely different levels to my work, and sometimes people cannot see all the levels of it. I don't believe that everyone will ever see all the levels of thought that could go into one piece, but that's okay, because if they could at least fully understand it on one level, then they'll still find enjoyment in my work. But sometimes I don't even understand the piece until it's fully done, and what I mean by that is I don't necessarily think in English. My thoughts are often garbled visuals, and it's up to me to pull the right ones out of my head and onto the paper to get what I'm trying to convey across. After finishing a piece, I sometimes sit back, then fully understand, because I continued to build on the original idea that I had, knowing that it had potential for something greater. Back to these shortcuts though, I did not use the shortcut on the entire piece. I made sure to throw in new visual concepts that work with the rest of the art. If it was just random patterns, the piece would still probably look really cool and visually pleasing to most, but for my personal standards, that's just too easy. I know I could come off as a bit braggadocious when I say that, but I'm not here to make art that is easy. I need to push myself, or what the hell am I even doing? Might as well go back to the pee-pee-poo-poo nothing matters school if that's the case. This entire art thing has stemmed off of seeing the growth of my craft. I would feel like a sellout to what I've worked for if I chose the easiest path to complete something. I think that's what makes a great artist a great artist. They don't choose the easiest option. They continue to push themselves to reach for something that seems just out of reach. The struggle makes it all the more worth it at the end when you could see the completed piece, and you can be proud of how the idea in your head has stemmed into something in the physical world. I wonder if I'll ever make it as an artist. I think there will be milestones throughout my artistic journey, but the end goal still seems to be changing bit by bit as my new artistic interests and desires deepen. I hope I never reach that point where I could relax and say, I made it, so I could continue to work closer to my rising standards of what I hold my work to. I think it's just balancing what I want and what my audience wants to see from me. Most artists will want to stay as true to themselves as possible, but it's hard in this modern era of art as we have to appeal to an audience. Most of us don't work for a wealthy patron like the artists of the Renaissance. It's forever changing. Us artists should now take into account what the masses desire. We have to search deep for what they would love in art that they haven't seen so that we could create and mold our artistic desires with the consumer's desires. It's a balance of not selling out to the audience or yourself. Writing that line in the middle is where I believe you could find that sweet spot of falling in love with the craft and the culture. In those years and years of what feels like failure to connect with your audience, it seems out of your grasp can sometimes make you feel like your work is nothing. I mean, I feel that constantly. Sometimes it's just me trying to trick myself into using that idea of my work not being enough to push myself further. But that's just not healthy for me, as I should ideally be thinking that I'm in complete control of what I do, which I do have complete control in my artistic future. But I have this emotional connection between my work and how I think my audience will perceive my work. It's something I definitely have to work on. Once I could separate my skewed perception of what my audience thinks of my work, which is really just my opinion of my work, I think I'll be able to free up more barriers that I put on myself, and I'll have more confidence not only in the craft, but in myself. So for today, my mind was blank for the first few minutes I was drawing. Then I got this great idea. I drew 3 eyes and created 7 faces all connected to those 3 eyes. Then I turned the giant lump of mashed heads into a melting candle to make it look even crazier. After that, I really had no clue what I was gonna draw next, so I just started drawing lines and patterns until I was able to form more visual concepts. My thoughts are often garbled visuals, and it's up to me to pull the right ones out of my head and onto the paper to create something great. But it isn't just pulling visuals from my head, it's also holding on to ideas and continuing to shave it down to the essence, and then rebuilding it into what I think the best version of that idea is. The possibilities are really endless, and it's just up to me to pick and choose what I believe is the best option, and then execute. What I love about drawing is that I could take my time to do it right, but with these pieces I need to have one done every day. and usually I do not get started on them until the sun goes down. That means that I'm not really taking my time as much as I do on different pieces, but the upside of doing something like this means I have to build on my skill of improvising and working with a short deadline. And working with a short deadline is something I've always hated, so building this mindset and having fun with short deadlines will hopefully allow for me to work on future projects with deadlines without as much stress as I have now. After I finished day 3's drawing, I already had an idea for what I was going to do for day 4, so I started off with a giant arched building, similar to that one building in Paris. I think it's called like the Arc de Triomphe or something. The idea for this piece though was an architecture-themed drawing, but as I kept going, another idea slowly started taking shape. It isn't uncommon for me to switch directions in the middle of a piece, especially when it's a large-scale doodle that I didn't have much of a plan to begin with. I started to think about how I would visually display collective consciousness, which is the set of shared beliefs, ideas, and moral attitudes which operate as a unifying force within a society. It slowly took form as I drew the society at the bottom that the man was drawing in, and as you looked up, all the little cords connected to the brain morphed into a giant cloud of eyes, buildings, and people, and a bunch of other stuff. It's really a combination of unknown abstraction paired with familiarity to create this piece with the right shapes and symbols. The direction of the objects is also very important. If things are placed too randomly, the piece looks like it's exploding in all different directions, creating a lot more chaos than I intended to. My favorite approach is to point certain objects in the same direction and balance out the numbers of directions or objects that are reflected or moving throughout the piece so they can be grouped into different parts by the viewer. By compartmentalizing the drawing into a few parts moving in different directions, it allows for the imagination to get a grasp on the piece faster and easier. Now the viewer could look around the drawing and depict certain scenes and directions the drawing is going in, and discover new things by looking into the intricate details or the big picture. What I enjoyed most about day 5 was the shading. I love adding in the lines that create depth to the drawing as a whole. Making simple patterns with lines is something that I've been doing since elementary. I played around with how the length between each line can create a lighter or a darker shade, and as I continued to acquire more abilities within the domain of drawing, I changed up the way I shaded. And as I continued to grow and learn new techniques, my patterns become more complex. And when I talk about patterns, it's not just a sequence of shapes that make a mandala or Zentangle type design, but patterns within the placement of certain elements of the drawing that create a balance. It's creating organized chaos, as I mentioned in day 4. This has become a major turning point for me in my development as an artist, as I'm able to create entire scenes off the top of my head through understanding the fundamental patterns and placements of certain objects, understanding the bigger picture while working on the intricate details. It's like dreaming, kind of, where you have no control over what is happening, but you still kind of know in the back of your head what direction the dream is heading in. Everything kind of makes no sense and perfect sense at the same time. Another thing I wanted to point out that I did not address in the TikTok videos I made of this drawing series is the use of my Clockman character. The clock character was inspired by the painting Son of Man by Rene Magritte. I took my own spin on his original work and created a character with a whole new meaning. Apparently though, some people have a problem with this, as they say I'm blatantly copying the Son of Man character. If you really think that I'm copying his character and that it's own original, then you could go tell Cause that his characters are knockoff Disney characters, or you could go tell Shepard Fairey that he's copying Russian propaganda art, or complain about Andy Warhol and that he shouldn't be copying Campbell's soup. The point that I'm trying to make here is that these artists and many others that have considered the history, past artworks, and things that inspired them have taken those ideas and turned it into something with a whole new meaning. They've made something new and original out of existing things, bringing something to the table that wasn't there before. All artists go through the phase where they're inspired by something or someone and just wish they could make art exactly the way their favorite works are made. Some people never move on and will continue to imitate whoever they look up to, while lasting artists have an idea that could go above and beyond what their inspirations have done.